Do y'all ever listen to your own voice and go like, yikes? Hi, hello, how's it going? It's Lo. I'm really up close and personal today, huh? I'm trying new things with my camera and I'm looking at the viewfinder and I'm really close to the camera. I'm not sure how this is going to turn out. But yeah, let's see if this works. February, as the majority of you may know, is Black History Month in the United States. I had a bunch of things planned for Black History Month, mostly because the United States gets Black History Month and Brazil gets Black History Day, which is, if your immediate thought was, well, that's kind of racist, yeah, it is. But, however, I didn't have time to do anything. I barely had any time to read. I read nothing this month. So I decided to commemorate this month in any little way that I could, and the way that I found that I could do that was doing this video in which I will recommend 7 books of Black theory so you can add to your TBR. Last summer, there was a lot of reading about Blackness and about race, and all of that is extremely important, but it's also important for us to add books by Black authors and books of Black theory to our TBRs all year long. As the years pass and academia has sucked more and more of my soul, I've accumulated a couple of books that are about Black theory, but written by Black authors, and that were fundamental in the formation of myself as a critical thinker. So I decided to share my favorites with you guys today. This is going to be a really quick video, just talking a little bit about the books and explaining a little bit why they're so important to me. And yeah, let's get started. So my first book in this list is this one. This is Talking Back, Thinking Feminist, Thinking Black by Bell Hooks. This is an old fave of mine. I've read this book the first time when I was a wee feminist baby, and this book helped a lot. She talks about many different themes, like from academia and Black women in academia, and the proximity of feminism and militarism. So there's a lot of things that you think that might not as well go together. However, the common thread between all of the essays in this book is that she talks about how using our voice is inherently revolutionary. She just departs from the idea that when she was a kid and when she was growing up in a segregated South in the United States, people often told her not to talk back. And she wants to explore in this book how the many instances in which we are silenced actually make it so that our talking back when it happens is even more potent. My favorite part of this book is chapter 7, if I'm not mistaken. Also, by the way, this edition, absolutely fucking stunning. Once again, Brazilian publishing really handing it in. Like, what? What? Chapter 7 is called Towards a Revolutionary Feminist Pedagogy. I think this is how you say the word. Basically, it's an essay in which she will engage with a Brazilian author called Paulo Freire, who wrote a book called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. This is very famous amongst pedagogy scholars, and Bell Hooks is one of them. You know, I'm Brazilian. I just love when they talk about us. I just love when they talk about the good things that we have to offer, like Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is fucking amazing, so yeah. The second book in this list, surprising absolutely fucking no one, is this one. This is Women, Race, and Class by Angela Davis. I have a full video review of this book in my channel. I'm going to link in the cards up above. Basically, in this book, Angela Davis writes a series of essays examining different aspects of the Black woman's experience within the context of the United States. She begins from slavery and tries to understand a little bit how slavery has shaped women and how the institution of slavery has shaped women, but she also looks into the foundations of the feminist movement, the suffragettes and all of that, how this movement actually was concocted within the anti-slavery and abolitionist movement, but how it systematically distanced itself from that original struggle in order to appease to white women in the South, and how this made it so that the beginning of the feminist movement and even the feminist scholars that would think of like Susan B. Anthony and Katie Staten, how those women too ended up playing on the race card to make sure that they would secure the support from the women from the South after the Civil War mainly. But she talks about a lot of things, and I think the main takeaway from this book is that it's not that feminism doesn't apply to Black women. It's not that Black women are outside of feminism. It's just that Black women's experience are so different that... Meu cachorro vai latir. Meu cachorro vai latir porque meu gato miou. Yep. Sabia? It's just that the issues that Black women face come from a very complex web of different oppressions and different layers of oppression that end up creating a very different experience that needs to be addressed properly. She has a chapter in this book talking about communist women, and it's just one of the chapters that I think explained this quite well, and this is the chapter that I would recommend. This is chapter 12. And basically it's racism, birth control, and reproductive rights. She actually explains pretty clearly how, for instance, when we think about reproductive rights in the context of mainstream feminism, we're always thinking about the right to abortion. But what she explains is that for many Black women and women of color who were subjected to forced sterilizations, who were denied the right to raise their own children, and who have been historically denied the right to motherhood, the idea of reproductive rights is not as much only about abortion as it is as the right to create and raise and rear a family. So if feminism wants to speak to those women, it needs to address those issues that come from, again, this very complex, interweaving, interlocked web of meaning that exists upon the layerings of oppression, like she expertly claims in this book. This is also the Brazilian edition, as you can see. Also very fucking stunning. Like, I don't know, man. We Brazilians would just keep winning. We just keep winning. The next book on my list is Black Feminist Thought by Patricia Hill Collins. If you are, like I was once too, a little baby feminist and you're trying to get your footing around the different strands and the different lines of feminist thought, I cannot recommend Black Feminist Thought enough. Patricia Hill Collins just makes an entire overlook in what Black women have been thinking about feminism up until the 1990s, which is when she published this book. And this is an absolute masterpiece and an absolute must-read if you want to understand what Black feminists have been thinking and what Black feminists have been talking about and what Black feminist stands for. Basically what she does is to include many different authors like Bell Hooks, like Angela Davis, and many others to actually put together a cohesive list of sort of like a timeline of Black feminist thought, but also of the main themes that are discussed in Black feminist scholarship. And so she talks about sexual politics, she talks about motherhood, she talks about work, and she talks about, domestic work specifically, how that has been used to oppress Black women in the United States for ages, and what Black women have been doing in terms of activism. The part that I love the most in Black feminist thought is chapter 10. Chapter 10 is U.S. Black feminism in transnational context. And basically what she does is that she kind of like contextualizes all of that she had talked up until that point in the sense of, look, we are in a very difficult position because we are very oppressed in the context of the United States. And we need to talk about how oppressed we are, but we still are in a position where we are living in the country that is the richest country on earth precisely because it exploits and oppresses other Black women in other places. Absolutely extremely interesting, absolutely a must read. And this book completely shaped the way that I think feminist scholarship, and it has really turned my eyes to the ways in which we as feminists and the feminist movement as a whole have whitewashed the feminist movement, and how mainstream feminism doesn't recognize and doesn't honor the women who have been doing this very important work to create the terms that we have been using in mainstream feminism and don't even think where it came from. I do have to make a note that even though Patricia Hill Collins does locate Black feminist activism within the context of the United States and how that exists within a larger global context, she's not quite as decolonial as I would like. But then again, I have Lelia Gonzalez and Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí to kind of cover for that. And speaking of which, the next book that I would recommend is The Invention of Women by Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí. In The Invention of Women, Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí actually does a total and complete 180 in feminist thinking. Basically, what she argues is that asking the woman question, which is a common form and a common practice of feminist thinking, is actually a Western question. And what she argues is that this is something that is forced upon other communities and other societies precisely because of colonization. Oyèrónkẹ Oyèwùmí is Yoruba, and basically she does a very extensive and very meticulous study on how the organization of Yoruba society happens. And what she explains is that the organization and the division and the classes are divided by age rather than gender, insisting upon the division on biological terms, biological reproductive terms. In those societies is actually doesn't really fit, is like colonizing the thought. And if you are to think feminist thought within those spaces, you have to take into consideration that this division is, in her words, also an effect of colonization. And therefore, you cannot talk about feminism in Yoruba society and not also talk about colonization. This is absolutely groundbreaking, and I absolutely love what she has to say. I think this is so important. I do understand the importance of her work, and it's absolutely amazing, but I am a little bit iffy on extrapolating her conclusions to any other countries and other communities, because I think that it's kind of hasty for you to say that in all communities, all societies that preceded Western civilization, there wasn't a sort of gender-based hierarchy. And I think this is quite premature to say, not only because we don't know all of them, but even if we did, we still know of some that do exist, like this system of gender division, gender oppression by this hierarchy. Now, if you're saying that in no other society the gender oppression exists to serve a capitalist purpose to control reproductive work and reproductive activity in order to ensure control on the labor force, then yeah, 100% agree. I think that the way that we experience gender oppression today is a direct consequence of capitalism, and the way that the majority of the world will experience gender oppression is also a direct consequence of colonization, because, you know, capitalism was exported and forced upon all of us. But then again, this is just me and my decolonial feminist ramblings. It's just something, it's the shit that keeps me up at night when I'm trying to write my thesis and I'm just like, but I don't know what I'm talking about. Okay, so let's take a little break from feminist thinking as of now, and let's jump to one of my absolute favorite books of all times, and that is Necropolitics by Achille Mbembe. Necropolitics is one of those books that I always think that I fully understand, and then a couple of years later I will revisit it and be like, holy fucking shit, I never thought I could have a deeper understanding. Every single time is just... In Necropolitics, Achille Mbembe actually argues that, and he kind of runs a little bit of Foucault's idea of biopower, which is the ways in which the government and, you know, those in charge actually regulate our bodies. They regulate which bodies are acceptable and which bodies are not. Achille Mbembe actually kind of runs with it, and he develops the idea of necropolitics, which is not only the regulation of the body, but the regulation of life itself. And necropolitics is just basically, you know, dictating who can live and who can die, and how those people will die. And, you know, this might seem obvious at first, but it really isn't. It's not only just who are those people who will be killed by the state. It's also the people who will be exposed to death by the state. Who are the people who are in a situation of vulnerability and precariousness that will be constantly exposed to the threat of death? And so those are the questions that he asks in Necropolitics. And, you know, I always think that, oh yeah, no, I'm talking about police brutality, I'm talking about natural disasters and stuff. And then I went to reread this book again, and it just becomes so clear, the action of Necropolitics, just when you look to the COVID-19 pandemic. Like, who are the people who are dying, and who are the people who are getting the vaccines first? Who are the communities and the populations that are disproportionately affected by the infection? And where are the populations where they get better care, better access, and therefore they get better outcomes? And I'm not just talking within the context of the United States. I'm also talking about the context of the global state of affairs. Like, all of the countries in the global north are getting the vaccines, and we in the global south are like, yeah, guess I'll die. So I think this is very interesting to think about relationships of power within our own country, but also to think relationships of power within the world in a global scale, in a global state of affairs, because not easy. Definitely not easy. I think that nowadays it's even more important that we are systematically aware of the ways in which they are trying to get rid of us. Everyone who doesn't fit, everyone who is, you know, of a non-dominant race, everyone who is marginalized in any single way, they have been trying to kill us for a long time, and they will for the foreseeable future. So I think that it's incredibly important to pay attention to this as we can. And speaking of precariousness, and speaking of living a precarious life, the next book on my list is The Wretched of the Earth by Franz Fanon. If you are familiar with decolonial studies at all, this is probably a book that you have read a couple of times, like myself have. So Franz Fanon was born in Martinique, which I think is nowadays a French department, but it's a colony. It's a French colony, okay? Let's call it like it is. And Fanon is actually a student of Lacan, and he studies like the community mental health in the instances of colonization. Franz Fanon wrote this book in 1961. When he wrote this book, Algeria was still a French colony, albeit it was in the middle of the Independence War. But it's important for us to note that even though we have gone, you know, almost like, what, 60 years now from when he wrote this book, the system of colonization stays exactly the same. There is a discourse of dehumanization of the colonized, and be it colonized as in direct colonization or colonized as in neo-colonization and imperialism. When you say that certain countries don't know how to do something, don't know how to run elections, don't know how to, it's like always it's a way to demean countries that have a history of neo-colonization or colonization, or both, most likely both, to actually justify the intervention of the colonizer. And what Fanon argues, and he dwells a lot in this, is that because this is such a violent process, and because this is so based in violence, the overtaking of that to take those people out from power and to put the colonized in power will also be a violent process. It's an inherently revolutionary process. This book is actually like a total classic in decolonial studies. And if you have any idea, and if you want to study this any further, like, I cannot recommend The Wretched of the Earth enough. This is such like a baseline sort of way to understand how, you know, we come to be as colonized, and what is the responsibility of the colonizer in this sense, and how we must pay attention to what we're saying, not to perpetrate this dehumanizing effect of those who are in a colonized position. So 10 out of 10, absolutely amazing. Read The Wretched of the Earth. This is absolutely fucking great. So yeah. Finally, the last book in this list is Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde. I have a little bit of a hard time to try to categorize this book because this book goes into the list of the very few books that I read for college and academic reasons that made me cry. And then you might ask, Louisa, do you go to college for like English or something? No, I study law, and sometimes the things that I read are just like so touching that I just sob, and this is what happened with Sister Outsider. Sister Outsider was written before intersectionality became mainstream, so this is not exactly the word that she uses, but in Sister Outsider, Audre Lorde is actually precisely examining how her different identities actually act and react to one another and constitute a very peculiar experience that she feels like it's not talked about enough and that is not addressed enough. What she is talking about is that there is hope out of all of this, because even though they're trying to put us down by making us feel inferior, this is not a way for us to feel demobilized. This is a way of us trying to make great things out of this difference. And even though, you know, I don't share many of the experiences that she does, but it does feel like she's talking to me and feeling like, look, I know it's tough, it's a hard road, but you are going to make through this, because we are all going to make through this. We're going to make beautiful things out of our differences. It's absolutely touching. One of the best books that I've read in my entire life. And another one that I haven't reread in a hot minute, and I'm really overdue a reread of this one. I cannot recommend Sister Outsider enough. I think that is an absolute must read if we want to connect with people, and if we want to make sure that we are not forcing people to shatter their identities completely to be able to be seen and understood by each other. So, I mean, what else can I say? Read Sister Outsider. This book is absolutely fucking gorgeous. So, yeah. Anyways, this was my list for the 7 books of Black theory that I think are a total must read. My original idea was to review each, like reread all of them and then review them individually. That did not happen, and I'm not sure that why I thought that I was going to have the time to do that. It's like, oh god, I'm delusional. But yeah, anyways, this was the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have read any of those books and if you're planning on reading any of those books, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.